Welcome to TVUG. Our February 2021 presentation will be on Xamarin.Forms 5 and the future of .NET. Presented by David Ortinau, Principal Program Manager at Microsoft. We are always looking for people to speak at TVUG. Share your knowledge and experience. Reach out to us at meetup.com/TechValleyNetUserGroup. TVUG is a proud member and sponsored by the .NETFoundation.org.
Here, screen two. Although I will say that during the introduction there, I spent that entire time trying to figure out how to get my presentation onto that monitor instead of that monitor, which is pretty sad. First time that's happened in a while. All right, cool. So I will keep my eye on the chat for questions. Let me make sure I can actually see the chat before I make claims. Because as soon as I started, I know what I need to do. As soon as I started sharing, it minimized. Cool. So please, as I go here, ask questions and I will keep my eye on that because many of you may have already seen a lot of these presentations because they are kind of repetitive recently. We've been doing a lot of presenting on things. First of all, can everybody see the screen okay? We good with that? I think we're good.
Looks good.
Cool. All right, cursor, boom. So as I said, I've been doing a lot of presenting lately. Everybody across the team, these are all up on YouTube now, and they're all hot links. So I'll share out this slide deck, be a nice little shortcut for you to go find these presentations. So a lot of this information, some of it more in depth, even from the engineering team, is already out there. So I don't want to just regurgitate the same old things. I'll probably move pretty quickly through some of the content. And if you have questions, again, ask the questions. Chris kind of introduced me, so I am a principal program manager at Microsoft. I've been with Microsoft now for 4 years. Before that, I was an MVP with Xamarin, not with Microsoft. So I never actually was in the cool Microsoft MVP program. But I also had my own company for like 3 years with Render with Ben Bishop, where we did almost exclusively Xamarin apps, although we did a little bit of Flash and a little bit of web, a little bit of WordPress. And then before that, for like 10 years, doing a variety of things. And then before that, enterprise healthcare software. And before that, agency work, media, creative, a lot of creative in my history. So I've been doing this for a long time. I'm older than I look, I guess, 25 plus years. Cool. So that's a little bit about me. I exist basically to help you understand what is happening within the .NET platform and to also hear from you about how we can make the .NET platform, in particular mobile and desktop application development, better for you so that you are having fun using it, you're productive using it, you're not cursing it on a regular basis. So that's really my whole function. And so anything I can do to help you out, make sure that your voice is heard, let me know. Cool. So lots of great content out there. Oh, don't start. Oh, I gotta watch out what you click on. Navigate. No, it's just gonna keep playing them. All right, there is a way to do this. Boom, next slide. Oh, it's just gonna play every single video. Sorry, I had to do that on purpose. That was pretty fun. The cacophony of noise. Also want to call your attention to our blog. So just last week, I think, right? Yeah, February 3rd was last week. Put up this blog. Oh, hey, go back one. See, now I really scared PowerPoint. There we go. Put up this blog about what we're doing with .NET 6 for mobile and desktop. So if you haven't read this, please do read it. It kind of restates some of what we announced at Build last year, but also kind of creates a little bit more definition for what is actually in scope versus what is maybe a future experience or an experiment for .NET 6. So check that out. Comment on it if you have comments, or feel free to go to GitHub. So let's talk about what you can use today. in Xamarin and .NET. So anything Xamarin 5, Xamarin.Forms 5 is of course .NET Framework. So putting that in the larger context of what is .NET and where is .NET going, it probably makes sense to reiterate that. And the runtime that we almost exclusively work with is the mono runtime in Xamarin.Forms 5 and existing stuff, with the small exception, I suppose, of the UWP platform. So why do we do this instead of that? I think it's always very helpful to reiterate to you and to everybody, why are we doing the things that we're doing? We have a certain, we are Microsoft, so we wield a certain amount of weight, but, we do have constraints just like everybody else does. So we need to spend our budget of attention and focus wisely. So whether it's UPS type applications, large enterprises that are used all over the place. As a matter of fact, I always like to go look at the tablets that the UPS delivery guy comes up, or gal comes up to the door with to say, hey, what app are you using? Oh, that's a Xamarin.Forms app. Or it's a small startup, or it's a cool 3D, or that's not 3D. That Blue Eye app is a underwater drone control, remote control app, written in Xamarin. A little bit of Xamarin.Forms in there, a little bit of Skia Sharp in there actually a lot of Skia Sharp, but really cool stuff. So no matter what it is, what category, what market you fit into, there are themes that address many of them. Now, not every release is going to be suited for your particular app, but hopefully we get to them in priority. Stability obviously is a big deal in Xamarin.Forms 5. It is probably the number feedback, number two feedback item that we hear in terms of customer interviews, surveys, and things like that. So I want to acknowledge that has been and continues to be a focus. As a matter of fact, the next wave here, basically, really, if you think about it, Xamarin.Forms 4.8 came out, early 2020? And the rest of the development through the year has been on stabilizing the preview features and really not adding any new features. Any new features that were added were just filling holes and gaps. So stability has been a focus, and there are no new major controls that are coming in .NET MAUI for the .NET 6 wave. There's a lot of value in MAUI, and we'll get to that in just a bit. So a lot of work in here is design focused, support for brushes. So that's gradients and solid brushes as well. And then shapes, which has been a really powerful addition. And some control templates have made their way into the toolkit. So that's a pretty exciting thing for that lookless control way of, I don't know why I'm doing this gesture, but the lookless control concept, if you're familiar with that from Windows development, where you can really set the entire look and feel of the control. And then productivity, making sure that you're not spending too much time in the platform. You can always get to the platform. We don't want to block anybody from doing that in Xamarin and .NET, because that's really the native platform is a key ingredient to building productive, good native applications, to overload the native term. But also you're not as productive if you have to go implement something 3 and 4 times, or 2 and 3 times, then that's usually at least 1 too many times. So doing it in the cross-platform layer and not having to go into custom renderers or effects is the ideal. All right, so a lot of stuff was shipped over the past, let's say 18 months. Let's go 1.5 years at this point, because this slide's a little dated. Oh, I love people still joining. We got an awesome crowd. So a lot of stuff in here, and really this is all driven by either a community contribution. Somebody seeded a PR, and then we worked and shepherded that and brought it into the toolkit. Or these were things that customers, developers just like you specifically asked for and said you really needed to be part of the toolkit. So all these things were added. but several of them were introduced in the experimental category. So these were things that you would have to go in and set a flag for to enable them in the toolkit, and they were in varying states of completeness. So that has been the case since, like, I want to say like 4.5. So there were about 3 releases where we introduced thing after thing, and but they were all preview. And so in Xamarin.Forms 5, they are now all stable with a couple of caveats and exceptions that I'll get to. So as mentioned, brushes, you get the gradients. You have all your gradient stops, and I think this is pretty much a WPF syntax here for how brushes are defined. So very cool, very easy to use. You can put them anywhere. You'll notice that anywhere you had colors before, now you have another property that is just, background, and it can take a Xamarin.Forms color, but it'll also take a brush now. And we'll be deprecating, I believe, the other color APIs to kind of have a consistency in .NET MAUI moving forward. Carousel, if you use carousels and build the kind of apps that need carousels, that's kind of one of those UI controls that ends up being in every app you build. Matter of fact, I was just talking to, let's say, a big PC manufacturer, to be generic, recently about their app needs, and carousel was right in there with it. They were like, we got to have a carousel. We use it all over the place. So that also has the indicator view as a part of it. And then we introduced drag and drop, which I think that we still need to bring this to the Windows platform. So that'll be nice to close the gap on that. But for Android and iOS, you can now do this. And it was introduced because of the need on the Surface Duo. I don't know if anybody here has the Surface Duo. I got to hold one in my hand once upon a time, and it's such a really cool device. I guess if I wasn't a daily carry on the iPhone, maybe I would have one already. But so drag and drop is very useful on that dual screen. You can drag things across the screen. You can drag it from one app to another app. You can drag it within the app. And this is the same API and strategy that is used in WinUI and UWP. So we met with that team and said, hey, how are you handling it? Let's be consistent. And there you go. RadioButton, the funny thing is, like, I never used radio buttons in my apps until we had a radio button, and then I was like, oh, this would be great. I could use a radio button here. The cool thing about the radio button, as you can see in the bottom image here, is you can fully template this puppy. And this is where those control templates come into play. So this is very useful. I think it will be a powerful addition to other controls as well. And so looking forward in .NET MAUI to kind of prioritizing and saying, okay, this control could really use the control template. Let's add it to this, this, and this. And make the controls more powerful. So that'll be a really nice addition. And that is in Xamarin.Forms 5, starting with the radio button. Shapes and paths, as I mentioned, super powerful. Things that you would probably in the past have used Skia Sharp for, or you would have perhaps, pre-made a bitmap to serve a certain need. Now you can draw them directly here in XAML or in C# or F#. Don't want to exclude anybody. But what's also really cool, especially with paths, and if you've seen any of my 60-second videos, I do this several times. I've done this in other demos before, where you can go into Figma or really any vector design program. You can right-click and you can copy the SVG path data out of the design, and then you can just paste it right in here. Path data is path data. So you really just need to change the markup to match what XAML expects. And poof, now you have your drawing inside of your Xamarin.Forms application. You can also do cool stuff like cropping, or I guess technically I should say clipping, but it is cropping. You can clip and mask different controls, pretty much anything with shapes. So that's another nice thing you can do with geometries. And you also have geometry groups and all kinds of crazy cool things you can do there. SwipeView was something that we added because Collection View doesn't natively support that gesture, that user experience or interaction experience in the same way that List View does. So we decided to introduce this. And the cool thing is it's useful even beyond the collection view. So yeah, we're using it in a collection view here, and I've got a demo I can show you where I use it in a collection view. Or is it a, I think it's a collection view. But the cool thing is you can wrap anything in a swipe view and add contextual gestures to it as you need to. And you can customize the swipe items with control templates, with whatever data template you need. And it's all set up for data binding, or you can just use the built-in stuff too. So that's really useful. So that covers a lot of the stuff that made it to GA, to stable release in Xamarin.Forms 5, but that leaves a few things behind. So what about the C# UI extensions for doing kind of a fluent syntax in C#, or the expander from Andrei Misyukevich, which is a really nice kind of, what do you call it, an accordion control. And then there was also the media element for video and audio playback. Well, those are now moved to the Xamarin Community Toolkit. And Gerald Verslaus and Javier Suarez Ruiz and Stephen Thavison and Andre, who I just mentioned, and several others have done a really good job rebooting the Xamarin Community Toolkit, which was started years ago by many developers. If I tried to name them all, I'd probably miss one and then I'd feel bad. So I'll just not name them at all and then feel bad. But it's got a lot of great stuff in it. So let me give you a couple of highlights of what's in the Xamarin Community Toolkit. I think this is kind of like Xamarin Essentials. You should it just should be in all your apps because you're going to use it. There's stuff in here that you've probably been copying from project to project. You either just class by class, or maybe you've even made your own NuGet package that you just bring over from project to project because you use the same converters and behaviors and extensions over and over and over again. And now they're in the Community Toolkit. And if the particular one that you use isn't represented there, then that's a great opportunity for you to go ahead and contribute. It's all open source. They're super friendly, and pretty much anything, as long as it's good code, will make it in and be useful to a lot more people. So please do that. There are some UI controls in there. The camera view is in there, and so that's getting better and better. I know that Gerald mentioned to me the other day, or I think he mentioned on the community stand-up the other day, that they had found some issues with it and we're tweaking it and fixing it. So that's encouraging. The expander is in there. The C# markup is in there. And so Vincent Hugendorn, who authored and maintains the Xamarin, the C# markup extensions, is continuing to innovate on that. I've seen some of the early kind of innovations he has in the works and he has planned. Pretty cool stuff. So I can't wait to see what he does there. There's an avatar view. There's a range slider. Gosh, what are some of the things that I've used recently in there? There is a badge view in there. Oh, I know that there's the tab view. Tabs are notoriously hard to customize in a tabbed page or in shell. And with the tab view in the Xamarin Community Toolkit, it gets a whole lot easier. There's also a lazy view in there. So if you have a particular thing that you want to make sure lazy loads and doesn't load too quickly. Oh, yes, the touch effect. Thank you, Matthew. I used the touch effect for a long press in a sample recently. It was very cool. So I just mentioned what the C# UI is all about, so you can go check that out. There's some good docs on that. Here's that expander with a nice sample from Javier. And then the tab view, I just updated this with the Los Gatos sample app, which I can run for you here in just a second. And it is, it's super cool. So you can see at the bottom there, I've got that raised shopping cart button in the middle. The infamous, I guess, Instagram kind of popularized that back in the day. Gosh, how old is Instagram now? It's been out so long that I consider it to be like, I don't know, an old app. All right, so that covers Xamarin.Forms 5. Why don't I jump out of the slides here for a second? Oh, look at that. Notes from a Figma Sharp meeting. Let me pull over my Visual Studio. This is the gallery. That's not actually the one I want. So let me go get the other app. There it is. Los Gatos. So this is the Los Gatos app that you just saw the screenshot of, and I'll go ahead and get it running while I talk through some of the code. So in the project here, you can see it's a typical Xamarin.Forms setup. I've got my head projects, Android, iOS, and Windows, and then I've got my app. In this particular case, I am not using Shell. I'm a huge fan of Shell, but until we get the TabView integrated or aware of how Shell handles things, I'm not going to use it with the TabView. So it sets up a navigation page. The shared transition navigation page that is used here is something that Javier put together. Or no, this isn't Javier. This is coming from the shared transitions library. So this does the hero transitions, where you have something that animates between one page and another page to create a fluid look. So if I bring over the app and resize it so that it's a reasonable size, I had this working at one point. Yeah, I don't know if you can see it across the screencast. Little cat here just kind of animated from the lower position up into the position she's in now. So it's pretty cool on my screen. Hopefully it looks okay on your screen. You can see that. Gosh, you know what? Something else I didn't mention that's part of this is the dark and light modes, which is super easy to do. But what was I talking about? Okay, so the shared transition navigation page is just kind of the host container. It's a specialized navigation page from the plugin that handles that hero transition. But back to the tab view. So the main page here, go ahead and you don't need to see all the resources. Get rid of some panels. Show us the code. So the bulk of it here is this Toolkit tab view. Well, one of the cool things that I like about the way the Toolkit is set up is that a while back we added the ability to do XAML namespaces with the URIs. So the Toolkit URI, you can see it's not a CLR namespace like the others. It is just this Toolkit URI. And so by just adding that, now I have all the controls and extensions that I need. Of course, I have the NuGet installed, but this is really nice. So when you go to set this puppy up, all you got to do is set up your namespace and then just type in Toolkit and it pops right in there. So I've been doing that a lot. Super easy to use. All right. So then within that tab view, of course, you've got a bunch of properties. Is swiping enabled, which is something that's more common on Android than on iOS. I have it disabled so that I have a more consistent behavior between Android and iOS. That's where you can swipe across the whole view and it'll change tabs, right? But then you set up a bunch of tab views in it. So I've got a tab view item here. I set up an icon for it. Font image source is another really useful thing that I use it everywhere. And you can see here that my font family name, and I'm just kind of randomly highlighting all the cool stuff that's in Xamarin.Forms 5. So you can either cheer or tell me to move on. But I think I have like, how long do I have, Chris? Do I have like an hour? I'll just keep showing you cool stuff.
You have as long as you want.
Oh, that's dangerous. I want to show you the font situation here. So I'm using Font Awesome, and you'll notice that there's no static resource thing happening here. Typically, when you would use fonts in the past, you would need to do a static resource and have a font family set up in your styles and do all the funky naming between Android, iOS, and UWP, because heaven forbid there was consistency anywhere. So now what we have is this font is an embedded resource, the font file itself. And then in my CS, and I can do this anywhere. I apparently did not do it in the font file. I didn't do it there either. Where did I do it? Did I do it in the theme? It's the danger of doing it all over the place. Somewhere in your code, in your C#, you're going to add an assembly tag, and you're going to use the export font. Now, this is going to be even more streamlined in .NET 6 with the single project experience, because we'll just handle all this stuff for you. You'll never have to write this, but we'll go ahead and do it for you. But in the meantime, You just need to tell it what the embedded file resource name is, and then you give it an alias. And then the alias is what you use everywhere. So that's what you see me doing back here on the main page. So for the icons of the tabs, that's what I've done here. You'll notice there is a default icon, and then there's a selected icon. So one of the cool things that Javier did when he helped me build this is, if you can see this, when I click on the heart, it's going to spin. And if I click on the house, it spins. And when I click on the settings, it spins. So that's a cool little animation transition that he built into it. And if you go pick apart the code, you can see exactly how that happens. And then the actual content for this tab is just the reference to the page here. Now, one thing I would recommend not doing is this, because this means that each of these pages gets eager loaded, or, you know, it's going to load them all at the same time. So for this sample, it was like whatever. But in a production app, you would want to make sure that some of these, if not all of them, are lazy loaded. So wrapping them in a lazy view would be the way to go, which is now available in the Xamarin Community Toolkit. And if you are using another alternative, which is the Sharpnado Toolkit, JM Alfonsi has, Jean-Marie has built-in lazy view support in his TabView implementation. So you can just do it that way too. Somebody asked me recently on Twitter if this TabView inside of the Xamarin Community Toolkit was going to deprecate Jean-Marie's tabs, and we would never force another library to remove their implementation. JM does some cool stuff with his, and it's up to you to decide which one is better for you. All right, so a couple other things in here. Of course, I've got horizontal sliding, because that used to be really hard to do back in the day. And then this is the drag and drop, which is probably not something you would ever do in a real application, but I was looking for a way to show drag and drop in this sample. So I drag, as soon as I start to drag, it pops up this thing down here. You'll see that the thing I'm dragging, I've told the drag and drop what to drag, and then I can just drop it into that thing. And now when I go to my shopping cart, now I've got 2 cute kitten girls for $22.95. So this also has the swipe view. So as I swipe to the right, I get the save. As I swipe the other direction, I get a delete. And if we go look at that implementation, it's in the shopping cart page. Sure. It's a sure way to know right there that, so it is a collection view. I was right earlier. And I've got my shopping cart. Let's see here, swipe view. So the swipe view is here. Threshold is device independent units. How far should it go before it knows that I'm swiping? So you have to give it a good swipe. You shouldn't be able to accidentally trigger it by just, you know, tapping, which is always a problem when it comes to tap gestures conflicting with swipe gestures, right? Because if you've got fingers like mine, as soon as you tap, it's probably moving left to right a couple of pixels, and you don't want to confuse the phone. So you want to set a threshold that makes sense for you. You've got left items, right items. You've actually got, if I remember correctly, you've got swipe view top. Oh, now my IntelliSense is going to freak out. It's not going to give me anything, is it? Yeah, that's the way it goes. So you can actually do up and down swipe items as well. But it's left and right. And then you can, you know, in my particular case, I am creating the swipe item myself in terms of the content. So it's a grid. I have a gesture recognizer for my taps. And then I've got the box view that you saw behind me. Let me pull it back up for reference. So it's yellow. And the reason I'm doing it this way is so that I can do this corner radius to make it look like it really matches the rounded corners of my item template. So just to kind of further explain why I'm doing that. If I didn't care about that and I just had a squared off deal, then I could have avoided all of that and baked all of my content into the swipe item itself. Cool. Let's see. So that's swipe items. That is drag and drop. Let's see, what else do I have here? I'm using images in here. Let's see, I've got all of the shadows in here are based on the Sharpnado shadow control. So that is a third-party control. Go away. I accidentally triggered my drag and drop. Oh, let's see here. On the settings page, we have these are the radio buttons. So this is using the control templates there. So you can see it's a bit more advanced. As a matter of fact, this design, this radio button design is actually from Fluent UI. So I just mimicked what they did there. So if we look at the settings page, here are the control templates in my resource dictionary. So I set up control templates for image quality. And then not only that, but within them, I'm using visual state groups to change how it looks, which is how I control the look based on selected or not selected, or I guess it's checked or unchecked, are the states. And then here's the primary content and content presenter. So if you're familiar with creating control templates, that's the pattern you've seen before. And then down here on radio buttons, the style for all radio buttons takes that same template. So image quality radio template. And then if I scroll down to where the radios are, radios. I guess I'll just have to search for it because I'm blind. Late day blindness. Yeah, so this is another cool thing. So we talked about, should we be adding a whole other control for radio button groups? And we like our attached properties, and this made the most sense. So rather than adding a whole other control for that, you can annotate any container with what your group name is for the radio button group. So this therefore knows by convention that every radio button inside of this layout is now going to be part of the same group. So you get the mutuality, the exclusivity that you expect. And then the radio button provides the content just like that. I could do simple text inside of content, or I can do complex content just like that. And the control template takes care of the rest. So really cool, very useful stuff. All right, I think that kind of covers. I do want to highlight how the light and dark is happening. So this is the app theme binding. And if you look at how this is kind of built out here, this is the XAML markup extension for it. And so the app theme binding has light and dark. And of course, I just messed up all the color syntax in XAML, but you get the sense of it. So you can directly set your colors here. You also have the option to set the fallback. So I could set a default color here as well, instead of setting anything else. But this works not only for colors, but it'll work for anything. So if you have a light and dark image, you can add app theme binding as the binding for your image source, and then provide the different resources or just the direct images by name that you want to reference for your dark and your light modes. Let's see, I think it must be in the main page. Didn't really go look at where I did the color swapping. Where did I do the color swapping? Let's do this. Oh, you know what? It's the main page, isn't it? Main page is where I have the color. Yep, here we go. So when I click that theme button, let me go back here real quick. So when I click this, what's happening? So it's this click handler. It checks the application current user app theme. And if it's unspecified, what that means is it means that the OS is in control of whether you're in dark or light mode. I know that on iOS, you can tell the OS to either respond to light sensitivity, to time of day, or to always be dark or always be light. So you have that option at the OS level. And so within the app level, you as the app developer can choose how you want the app to behave. Do you want it to honor what the OS is set by the user or by itself, or do you want the user within the app to have control? So that's what unspecified means. It means that it's being handled by the operating system. Otherwise, you can set your own user app theme. So you can set it to OS app theme dark or OS app theme light. So all this button is doing is toggling back and forth. Tom says just rolled out full dark mode support for his app, and it helped a huge amount. Cool. Hopefully it was super easy. It's very straightforward. The syntax, a little more verbose than I would have liked, if I'm being completely honest, but you know, hey, it gets the job done and it's super easy to do. So yeah, it's a nice addition to any app. Cool. All right, so that's light and dark mode. I think I've spent about at least half an hour on Xamarin.Forms 5 things. Let me just look at the app here real quick and check and make sure there's nothing else that I wanted to specifically call out. So Xamarin.Forms 5, go back to the slides. It has already received, let's just go look. We have the power, we have browsers. So what do we got here? Nougat.org. And we go look at Xamarin.Forms. And I think we might be on service release 3. So there's stable, okay, 1, 2. So service release 2 is out. I just know that we were planning service release 4 in a meeting earlier today. So service release 3 is in the queue and will be coming out shortly. So we will continue to service, perhaps not at the same pace, but throughout the rest of the year up until really 2022, we'll continue to service this release with priority fixes, bug fixes, regression fixes. And then when iOS drops a new release and when Android drops a new release before .NET 6, because that's how the timing is going to work out, we will bump up the support for the necessary things in Xamarin.Forms 5. So really, in terms of how long you can ride the wave of Xamarin.Forms 5 in its existing state, that will be through November of 2022 in a supported state. And then once you get there, then you're going to need to and want to move off for sure. My encouragement is to move to .NET 6 and .NET MAUI as quickly as you possibly can. And we're doing everything we can to make that as easy as possible for you. So let's go back to the slides. I guess I should leave that over here. Hit present again. It just did the same thing. It moved presenter mode to the wrong screen. All right, bear with me a second so I can get this back up and running again. View. Present. I don't know why it decides to put it on the wrong screen. Super weird. Show presenter view. Yep. And then I have to flip it around. Swap. There you go. Man, where there's a will, there's a way. All right, cool. Any questions about Xamarin.Forms 5 before I jump into .NET 6 and kind of future .NET things? If you got something, go ahead and throw it in the chat. And I'm going to take a drink of water. Very refreshing. Cool. All right. So future of .NET, what the heck is going on? What are we doing? So let's talk about .NET MAUI. .NET MAUI, as it states here, is the evolution of Xamarin.Forms. No question. Everything's perfect. Everything's good. Hopefully that's not everything's good and then there's flames everywhere, right? So we are extending what Xamarin.Forms has to desktop. Not only that, but we're encompassing more scenarios. And of course, we're taking on .NET 6. Extensibility, kind of removing a bunch of the things that we know are friction and headaches, namely custom renderers and just the whole renderer architecture in general, really will improve our extensibility story there. So you'll hear us talking a lot more about mappers and handlers. and I'll maybe dig in a little bit as to what those things actually are, as opposed to renderers. So renderers is old stuff, mappers and handlers is new stuff. And then performance is a big theme here. So making sure that we are doing everything we can right now to improve the performance of the mobile apps. Desktop's not so much of a concern. Desktop apps perform really well. But when you're on a constrained device, especially Android, then performance becomes a critical piece. So, and also setting ourselves up for future performance gains. So I thought it would be cool to take a look at the layer cake, as it were, and talk about the different pieces that make up .NET MAUI. So this will look familiar to those of you who have used .NET and Xamarin for a long time. We have showed similar things in the past. Sorry, I'm looking at, I have alerts saying that I'm getting messages, but it's not from this group. Cool. So at the very bottom, let's start at the way bottom here. So down here are the actual OS platform bits. So Android, iOS, Mac OS, and Windows. Exactly what that is on Windows can change. There is basically the Windows runtime down here, and the tricky bit, and perhaps some of those of you who have been doing Windows for a long time know this even better than I do, but down here in that Windows layer is also some of the UI kit stuff. So UWP has its tendrils deep down inside of the Windows box here, whereas WinUI is decoupled and separated in terms of WinUI 3. WinUI 2 is a different story. And then on top of that, for our purposes, we have the .NET runtime. So this is where your code is primarily going to be executed and running. Depending on what platform you're running on, you may be running on the Mono runtime, often referred to as the Mono VM, or on Core CLR, the Common Language runtime. In .NET 6, we have a couple of opportunities for us to adopt Core CLR more and more, specifically on Mac OS. So on Windows, you're going to be using the Core CLR as opposed to Mono. But on Mac OS currently today, if you're running a Xamarin application, whether it's Xamarin.Forms or Xamarin Mac, you are running on Mono. So what's going to happen here is in Preview 2 of .NET 6, you're going to get the first look at Mac OS support in .NET 6, and it is going to be using the Mono runtime. That is the quickest, shortest leap for us to make to get to Mac OS in .NET 6. But the Core CLR team is actively right now working on Mac OS support. In the future for support of VS Mac and things like that. But also we're looking at it as the runtime that we'll use in .NET MAUI. Most of us feel like that's a likely thing that's absolutely going to happen, but we're kind of hedging the bet there a little bit. So we'll start on Mono in the previews, and then if everything looks the way we think it will for Core CLR, and there's no takebacks that are unacceptable in terms of what you would have as a Mac developer with Core CLR, then we'll go ahead and adopt that. On the next layer here is the .NET BCL. This is the base class library, and this is really the big unifier for us here in .NET 6. We are now using the same base class library that all the other workloads use, no matter where you run. Previously in Xamarin, you would be running on the Mono BCL, as opposed to when you're running on other platforms, you'd have a separate BCL, the .NET BCL. And many apps may never see the difference, but in some particular cases, you may be well aware of the differences between the Mono BCL and the .NET BCL. Then on top of that, you have the platform-specific SDKs that are .NET bound that you're going to be using. So Xamarin Android, of course, Xamarin iOS, although in .NET 6, the Xamarin bit, that part of the name goes away. So really at this point in .NET 6, it's really all .NET SDKs. It's the .NET SDK for Android, .NET SDK for iOS. The interesting piece here that you might notice is that in order to get to Mac OS, we are using what Apple has prescribed as their future plan, and that is using Mac Catalyst. Mac Catalyst is the UI kit plus app kit combination, and some special things. You know, Xamarin, yes, but it lives on. It lives on. The value of unifying is important, but I don't know if you can see, but I've got plenty of monkeys on the shelf over here. The monkeys will live on. Yeah, so Catalyst is the way that we get to Mac OS. It also means that all of the existing code and infrastructure that we have for iOS is immediately valuable to the Mac OS story. And so that's really great from an engineering investment standpoint, makes it easier to support future variations as well. So that's really cool. And then on the Windows side of things, it's WinUI 3. So we are taking our cues from the Windows team strategy in terms of where their future investments are going, and it's all WinUI all the time. So we are adopting that as well. We have a branch building and running and ready to be merged, last I asked, into the .NET MAUI branch, which on the Xamarin.Forms repo is actually called main handler. In the near future, and we were just talking about this today, the .NET MAUI work will actually shift to committing to the .NET MAUI repo, but for today, it is in the Xamarin.Forms repo. And so that's like just a few weeks away. Basically, by the time that we are inserting things into the Preview 2 release of .NET 6, we should be working out of the .NET MAUI branch, is my expectation. I think that's how things are going to line up. In case you can't tell, some plans are fluid, right? I'm sure that all of your plans always happen exactly as you expect them to. But for us, some things are a bit fluid. So, you know, we're planning and executing at the same time. Yeah, so WinUI, for those who are doing Windows Desktop, it's important for you to also know that WinUI 3 in .NET 6 is the Windows Desktop Win32 thing. I never know exactly what to call it. Runtime, app model, but it's the desktop, Windows Desktop. If you look at how you start a new WinUI 3 project today in the previews, you actually have 2 modes that you can run in. But when they support other distribution models, modes, and things like that, we inherit all of that infrastructure, so we can support all of that. And then on top of that is the .NET MAUI layer of the cake, where all of our code exists. You may or may not interact directly with it, but you're going to be writing all of your code at the very top of the cake because you are the icing on the cake. Man, I just made that up. That's a fantastic analogy. I need to make this thing look like a real cake, and I need to make your code look like icing. You are the icing on the cake. You are the ones that make the actual app beautiful, interactive. You make it do things. And so that's really where you are the most productive. If you have to go touching the Xamarin Android and the Xamarin iOS layer, that's deeper into the cake you have to cut and less productive that you will be. So part of our focus is to keep you in the app code as much as possible and letting you poke down into the other layers when you need to. Whoa, I just hit a button and the whole thing just disappeared. All right, we're back. I don't know what that was all about. Here we go. I wanted to call attention to this because this is a pretty cool thing and we don't talk too much about it from the Xamarin team, .NET MAUI team perspective, because this is really more of a Blazor story. But in .NET 6, you're going to be getting some cool Blazor stuff as well. You don't necessarily have to be authoring anything in Blazor. You can totally just ingest Blazor apps into your .NET MAUI app and use it as a control. Use it as a whole separate experience inside of your app. You could do some really cool stuff with this. So what this really comes down to is that you'll have a Blazor web view control that you can bring into your application, and it can host any Blazor content, whether that Blazor content will be primarily written in Razor templates with HTML and CSS and C#. But additionally, You also have the experiment, the mobile Blazor bindings, which the mobile probably should get dropped off of that name since you can really do desktop with it at this time as well. So the Blazor team will be talking more about this. I don't want to steal all that cool thunder, but you'll be able to do Mac, Windows, Android, and iOS in a hybrid mode if that's something that's interesting to you. I think that the most interesting aspect of bringing these technologies together, first of all, we're using our own stuff. The Blazor team is taking a dependency on .NET MAUI and on all the infrastructure, all that cake below it, in order to deliver desktop and mobile experiences. That's really cool. That means that we're using our own technology. We're making the double investment into the things that you might use on a regular basis, namely the mobile and the desktop pieces. But the other interesting thing is you know, when we talk to some larger enterprises, where you have a group over here within the enterprise, you got a group over here within the enterprise, and they're all building mobile apps, but they're using their own stacks and they're using their own technologies. And then they come to us and say, hey, we've got this Xamarin investment over here, we've got this Blazor investment, we've got this React investment, we've got this Ionic investment. How do we make sense of all of these things and bring them all together? Well, we're working on that. And this is one step in that direction where we're saying, here's how you can bring this web piece and this desktop piece together. Now, there's other opportunities, of course. How can we take that client app, XAML-based or C#-based, and take it to a browser experience? Those are things that we may look to in the future, but this is the first step in that direction of kind of harmonizing these different app investments, and seeing how you can get .NET things to play nice together, which you wouldn't think that would be hard. It's not really hard. It's really cool. All right. So I mentioned the base class library coming together, and I asked some of our engineers, hey, what's a really good example of how the base class libraries before .NET 6 would be different? And so the example that I was given, and this makes total sense, at least in terms of it's obviously different, is when you compare the system IO stream class and you look at what the write methods are. If you're doing this in straight .NET, you have this read-only span that takes a type. And in Mono, you don't have it. So if your app, if your library is making use of the one in .NET, and then you run that code in a Mono environment through Xamarin iOS, Xamarin Android, Xamarin.Forms, it wouldn't work. It would blow up, I assume. And so that's a bummer, right? Because then you've got a piece of .NET that's usable one place and not another place. Well, in .NET 6, those distinctions are gone. Not only are the distinctions gone in terms of what you can and can't do, but any of the performance improvements and tweaks that are made in the Core Effects library, which is the .NET BCL in .NET 5 and 6, then you get those benefits as well in .NET MAUI apps and in .NET Android and .NET iOS apps. Most of those things are non-UI specific. They're mostly off the thread, off the UI thread, but you know, hey, performance is performance. So we're excited to just kind of inherit those benefits. And we're looking forward to that. That's another reason where the core CLR versus mono VM becomes cool, is there's been a ton of performance work done in the core CLR, as well as quality work in terms of testing and things like that. And so we can also benefit directly from that, which would be really nice. All right, couple of other details just in general about the .NET MAUI, which is the multi-platform app UI. We are integrated into .NET. It's kind of ceremonial, but some of those repos will be, if not all of them, will be coming over into the .NET org. So MAUI is already there. Android and the Mac iOS, or Mac iOS, if you like to pronounce it that way, will be coming over into .NET. We're not forcing those things to happen super quick because, again, Android and iOS will continue on in their current form through the next year for support reasons, to make this transition to .NET 6 as smooth as possible. But MAUI is a brand new thing, sort of. It's obviously an evolution of Xamarin.Forms, as I already said, but it's a new repo, a new name, so we went ahead and created it in the .NET org. So you'll see those transitions happening. Some common .NET experiences, again, in the theme of unifying .NET and unifying what Xamarin developers have experienced in the past with what .NET developers for console apps and for ASP.NET and Blazor have had. More CLI things will be lighting up for Xamarin developers. When I've interviewed developers across the board, there's certainly those developers that fall into the category of, I just use Visual Studio. I never touch the CLI unless I absolutely have to. I don't feel really at home there. Totally valid, totally cool. Visual Studio continues to be your friend and will do everything for you. But there are those of us who have felt left out in the dark. Like, I want my CLI. Why can't I do that? I can do it in all these other technologies and platforms. Let me do it with my mobile and my desktop apps. So those things will start lighting up for you in .NET 6, being able to do .NET New, .NET Build, .NET Publish, .NET Run, .NET Watch, all these new verbs that are being introduced to us. Not every experience, though, will have a equivalent. That's the right word. In the CLI. So there's things that you do in the browser, or sorry, in Visual Studio that you just wouldn't do through CLI, like create a new emulator, install Android dependencies, for example. Initially, for sure, Android dependencies, you're still going to use the IDE for that stuff. We've already got the tooling built out for that. SDKs and emulators and setting up Xcode and stuff like that all happens through the IDE experience and the IDE installation experience. But the CLI will be useful for all those other things I just mentioned. Another example of where you wouldn't really use the CLI is to do your archiving, code signing, and kind of those more end of the pipeline experiences before you get them into the app stores. Of course, I would encourage everybody to be using CI, Azure pipelines for that stuff. And I guess, does GitHub have its own variation of that based on the same stuff? I haven't really paid attention to the GitHub CI stuff as much, but I would go the Azure pipelines, Azure DevOps route for all that stuff. VS Code is obviously pretty cool as well. It's very interesting. We got a lot of positive feedback when we demoed some early VS Code stuff at Build 2020. I want to be very clear, though, that it's going to be rudimentary support in the .NET 6 timeframe. You can absolutely use it. Debugger might require an add-in. It may not be a fully supported scenario, but you could totally use it. The fully supported scenario for mobile and desktop development is absolutely still Visual Studio itself, but VS Code begins to become useful in this time frame. All right, I mentioned Android, iOS, Mac, and Windows. Support for modern app models like Blazor and Comet. Here's your big disclaimer. Those are still considered experimental. So in .NET 6, those things will become much more interesting, I would say, over the summer. And in this context, to kind of contradict the previous slide, in this context, Blazor means the mobile bindings, being able to use Razor syntax, but basically directly call .NET MAUI controls. The experimental flag may come off of that sooner if it makes sense, but we're still getting customer feedback on that as Alon Lipton continues to iterate on that experiment. James Clancy is the owner of the Common experiment. I will, though, point out that those experiments are now officially underneath the .NET org on GitHub. So they're no longer just sitting off on private repositories or in the Xamarin repo. They're now in the .NET org to demonstrate that, hey, we are taking these seriously and we really want to know what you think about them, because we are investing some level of effort into proving out those experiments. In terms of what the heck it is that we're all about, kind of hearkening back to the Xamarin.Forms 5, why did you do this instead of that? Here are the themes of .NET MAUI in this time frame. And I want to be very clear that this is the .NET 6 time frame. We've got plans that extend into .NET 7 and even .NET 8, 9, and 10. All things are kind of etched in jello the further you get out there, because plans will change, markets will change. Hopefully no more pandemics after this one, so we can stop saying, hey, during the pandemic. Get sick of that story. So, but these are the things that we're focused on for .NET 6. So quality, again, continues to be a pillar. It's always there, but I want to, we're calling it out especially here. In terms of, it goes all the way to how we even organize our code. We're now using multi-targeting. We're now reorganizing all the controls to have consistency of naming and conventions. Whereas if you've ever tried to, for example, update a button in Xamarin.Forms, and you've tried to even submit a PR for it, you've come to realize there aren't just 3 buttons in Xamarin.Forms for Android, iOS, and Windows. There's more like, 6, 7, because you have the material version of it for iOS, you've got the app compat version for Android, and you've got the non-app compat version, you've got the legacy renderer, and you've got the fast renderer. So, hey, when you've had 7 years of in-market development on a platform, you got a lot of cruft there. And so one of the things we're doing here is cleaning all of that stuff up. All of it might be overselling it. We're cleaning a heck of a lot of it up with hopefully as little breaking changes to existing apps as possible. That's definitely in our mind. Performance is a key factor, not only cold start, which is the first time your app starts, but also your warm starts, the starts that happen after that, and then just the general responsiveness of the UI. Couple of key ways that we're addressing that are with those mappers and handlers that I've mentioned, as well as with your how your app startup is registered. Not relying upon reflection to do those things, not scanning all the assemblies at runtime, instead pre-generating some things as well as directly registering your handlers. Reducing view nesting, which is a whole big part of the renderer to mapper move. And then we've got some cool things we're doing for design that will start to appear further down the line in the .NET MAUI previews. So I'll kind of save some of that stuff for later, but the ability to make it easier for you essentially to deliver a consistent app experience across platforms instead of having these more platform specific and different experiences. And then of course the platforms, which I've talked about many times. So you can follow all this on Discord, and the Discord conversations are really geared more towards contributors and people that want to engage on the architectural conversations. It's not for, hey, how do I use the platform? That's more of what discussions and the Microsoft Q&A is for. And then of course the GitHub repos. So I encourage everybody to bookmark, star, watch all of those, engage in the issues and in the specs and things like that, so that we know you can help us steer the platform. We also have themes of .NET, which from a very high level describes what all the experiences are that we're lighting up in this time frame. From a timeline standpoint, Preview 1 is literally cooking and ready to ship now. We have the .NET 6 Preview 1 runtime and BCL installer. We also have installers built for Android and iOS. So those are ready to go. Preview 1 will not have .NET MAUI specific bits. So it's really not useful for building .NET MAUI apps. Android and iOS is just first look runtime support and basic SDK support. Preview 2, we will have a .NET MAUI insertion with as much of the handlers, layouts, and things like that as are completed. Android and iOS at that point, we expect to be pretty much done. This will also, we expect, to be the first introduction of Catalyst, and it will, as I mentioned before, have the mono runtime for Mac. So we're expecting all of those things to land in Preview 2. If you want even more up-to-date information, make sure to join the .NET Xamarin, we're still calling it, Community Stand-Up, first Thursday of every month. I'll always be doing a 5-minute kind of just update, telling you exactly where we stand on handler creation, how much of the toolkit is ready to go, and any other highlights and tidbits, so that you have the most up-to-date information and you can know what to expect. But really, Preview 3 and Preview 4, so we're talking April, May timeframes. These are the releases that you as a developer can actually light up applications, do a file new, check things out, build some things, get a feel for what the performance is going to be, and really be building apps. I wouldn't still at this point suggest trying to migrate apps. Xamarin.Forms apps absolutely will migrate to .NET MAUI. It's the same XAML. It's the same naming of controls. The namespaces will change. The target framework monikers will change. That's the little thing in the CS proj that tells it what to build with, essentially. You will move from the Franken-proj, which is what I call it, which is the CS project format you have today in Xamarin. Will change to the standardized SDK style project on the common project system. So that's the same project system that the rest of .NET uses. The consistency, you really can't underestimate the value of having the consistent toolkit, the tool chain, the build tools that all the rest of .NET uses, as opposed to the bits that Xamarin has had to use in the past. Because when it wasn't part of .NET and Microsoft, it had its own, it had to work around some things, right? So now you can see us moving more into the heart of what .NET is, because now we are part of .NET. And I fully hope for and expect to have much more reliable, consistent, performant build tool chain from beginning to end. All right. Preview 5 through release candidate is going to be a bunch of let's fill in the remaining gaps. What's the rest of the toolkit that needs to be there? What's the feedback we're hearing from developers and we're seeing from you building? And what do we need to address? As well as completing the migration experience, whether it's through a try convert, which is a command line tool, or if I'm promoting that we should build a .NET MAUI app that executes the conversion process for you using try convert. The engineers are pretty overwhelmed with all the work they have, so I'll probably build that on my own. Hey, and I should probably recruit you as developers to come help me build a try convert .NET MAUI app. If you're interested, reach out to me. I'll put some folks to work. So I think with that, let me bail from there, and I will kill Los Gatos, minimize that, and I will bring up just a real quick rudimentary. This is the sample app in the repo, and actually, let me kill this. So what I'm actually looking at, let me give you the context because I switched really fast and probably gave everybody whiplash. So this is well, let me do this. Xamarin.Forms. So what I pulled down was I pulled down the main handler branch from Xamarin.Forms. This is where the active work is happening for .NET MAUI. And then once a week it gets synced up to the MAUI repo. So what I did was I went into the platform handlers and I opened up this sample project. The sample project is very straightforward and very simple, but this is where the team is just, it's a sample app. So they're just throwing things on the screen and proving some things out. The actual official sample and all the UI tests and everything is actually in the control gallery, which we'll be doing some polish and some cleanup to that as well to just make it look nicer. But this is the sample app that's on the side. You can pull this down, you can run this, and I've actually got it running over here, which is what I pulled up for you a second ago. So if I guess I can't do that now. Let's see. Sample, is it just called sample? I should have made note of what the heck it was called. Los Gatos, personal finance, shell login, shell style, to do recipes, not the recipes. Maybe it's this one. That's it. So that is going to disappear in about 5 seconds, which just simply demonstrates that adding and removing UI elements from the screen is possible. So you can see this is what you would get if you ran Preview 1 and Preview 2 with the code in the .NET MAUI repo. You would look at it and you would be like, oh, this is super boring. Why would I even care? But hey, when you're building a toolkit back up from the ground up, it's pretty exciting just to be able to see stuff on the screen, right? You're like, hey, this thing actually works. So that's what you actually see on the screen. Here's the code that's actually making that work. So my app is the equivalent of your app.cs today. And all that stuff will still totally work as well. But the mapper handlers is all about decoupling the app framework from the UI controls themselves, the platform controls. That decoupling has significant performance benefits, we believe. Early tests demonstrate at least a 3-time performance boost. So that's very encouraging. And then it also enables us to do things like Comet and Blazor, iterating on different ways to build your apps, whether it's model view update, reactive, whether it's using C# or F#, whether it's XAML or no XAML. We can do a bunch of really cool experiments on top of the same controls and benefit from that whole toolkit of cross-platform controls without paying the price of iNotify property changed and all of the data binding infrastructure that's really useful when you want it, but when you're doing something like Comet with MVU, you don't need it, and so it's just in the way. So everything becomes interfaces at that point. Not everything, but most things become interfaces at that point. So that's why you're seeing this, and it doesn't quite look like your app.cs. I'm totally hiding the comments, so if somebody is like scratching your head, I couldn't see it. And so what's really happening here is it's calling create view, and it's throwing a couple of stacks on the screen, giving it some properties, and then adding a button to it. But the basic stuff you just saw on the emulator. One thing I did want to call attention to is this platform init. Wow, can't do that. Do this. Yes, that. I love being able to navigate code now in GitHub. As a matter of fact, this is probably still too small for you though, so let me jack that up. So I was mentioning before how we're no longer going to be scanning all the assemblies. We're going to be doing direct registration of handlers. Probably we'll do code generation for this so that it's a compile time, nothing that you have to do yourself. But you could always come in and do these things as well. So we've got the registrar, and we're registering different handlers. So when you ask for a button, how do you want to satisfy that? Well, in this case, it's the button handler. If you have the slider on the screen, how are we going to actually satisfy the requirement for a slider? The slider handler is going to do that. And then you'll notice that in some of these cases, we have the Xamarin.Forms variation, but then we also have the new .NET MAUI layouts. So there's new layout improvements that are coming as we're moving the layouts from the renderer architecture to the handler architecture. There's some performance tweaking and some cleanup that's happening at the same time, but there's also compatibility that's built into things through either a shim layer or just by design, so that your Xamarin.Forms libraries and code continue to work while migration happens. Because we're making an ecosystem transition here, right? If you back up and do the 30,000-foot view, we're taking a whole ecosystem and moving it into .NET and .NET 6 with a bunch of fundamental changes. And so we want to make sure that we can make this as smooth of a transition as possible and not leave a bunch of libraries behind, right? So, and not leave a bunch of projects behind. We want to make sure we move it all forward so that we don't have you could probably think of many examples where you had one toolkit, a new toolkit was introduced, and there was no migration strategy. There's no transition strategy. We're not doing that. We've learned. All right, cool. So there's that. What else did I want to show you from this particular thing? Let's look at a handler real quick. So here are the handlers that are currently in the repo, and then let's look at slider, because slider is the most complete. So you already see this is the multi-targeting. It's that convention, and you don't have to use this convention in your multi-targeting. You're probably well aware because you're probably all better .NET developers than I am. But we've chosen to use this suffix convention for our stuff. So the handler implements iSlider, and then it is inheriting, or I guess it's based on a view handler. So a lot of stuff comes along for the ride, but we then map out all the different properties that need to be supported. I'm probably going to butcher the explanation of all of these things, so I will recommend checking out some of the mapper handler renderer stuff that is on YouTube now. In particular, the Javier presentations, the Shane Newville presentations, and the James Clancy presentations. So they were all on like that slide 2 of this presentation. I will again share the deck out. Check those out on YouTube because they're all the engineer brains behind this particular architecture, and they will explain it way better than I could. So here we're mapping when somebody sets the minimum, where the heck does that go? So that's going to map it to the particular implementation, which most of the stuff is actually handled by extension methods or extension, whatever you call them. But some of them get handled in here. So here, mapping the minimum, mapping the maximum. So there's some helper here in the view handler that checks the parameters, and then it's going to do an update minimum, which if we look at the Android implementation of this, where is it? Android slider extensions. Here's the actual native code that makes that happen. So it's it takes a little bit to get your head around navigating the path, but it makes this code a whole lot more reusable. And I mean, if you compare looking at this, what is this, 6 lines of code? You compare that to navigating and trying to figure out where the minimum is set on the slider in the Android renderer. That renderer class is just like some big thing, right? It's like hundreds of lines of code. This is a whole lot easier to grok, to maintain, as well as, and this is the part of the extensibility, which we'll show demos for in the future. I don't have a good demo for it today, but the ability for you to just like, let's say you don't like how we implemented the way that minimum is handled. You want to have some other logic to it. Well, the ability for you to override how minimum is implemented, so much easier, and it can all be done in the shared library, as opposed to today in Xamarin.Forms, you'd have to go write a custom renderer or an effect, which is at least 2 classes, if not 3 classes plus, to be able to implement that and override a simple property. Whereas in .NET MAUI, it's literally a block of, the equivalent of what you see here, like 6 lines of code. So I'm really looking forward to demoing that more in the future. I apologize, I probably did a horrible job of explaining it. Less code in MAUI, that's the TLDR, right? Less code to override simple things, if you even have to, in .NET MAUI. Hopefully you don't. Hopefully you're like, this is cool, totally don't need to do that. All right, I kind of think that I have rambled on long enough. Any questions? I've hit on timeline stuff. I've hit on the highlights of what it is that we're doing. Questions, thoughts? Rand, ask me anything. I'm here.
Literally, ask him anything.
Ask me anything. Beautiful. You're talking about me, right? I'm gorgeous. No, I'm sure you're talking about the code. What brand is the jacket? That is an important question. This is a Patagonia. This is the down sweater. And that tells you just how cold I was at the beginning of this thing. I was just, because I've got the open windows, not open windows, but it's just like, yeah, I'm exposed. Will, is that a Prussia behind me? No, it's not. This is a Ender 3 that I modded pretty heavily because, I mean, you have a 3D printer, you have to immediately start modding it. So it's the Ender 3, and I put the glass bed on it. I put the BL Touch so that I don't have to level my bed anymore. Then I got a bunch of other mods for like running the strings and stuff. I do have a what do you call that? A Raspberry Pi that works with it too. So I like that stuff. Other question here from Nathan: will MAUI.NET affect any straight Xamarin Android or Xamarin iOS projects, non-forms? Yeah. So .NET 6 absolutely will. Here's how I hope that we all start thinking about it. All existing Xamarin apps, whether it's what you would call Xamarin Native, Xamarin Legacy, or Xamarin.Forms, I hope that everybody just starts thinking of them as all .NET MAUI apps for a couple of reasons. The expectation that I have is that, well, first of all, Essentials is merged into MAUI now. So if you want to use Essentials, you're going to bring MAUI into your application anyway. We don't expect there to be any big hit or even noticeable hit in terms of performance or UI lag or anything with .NET MAUI inside of a Android iOS app. So hopefully that limitation and that stigma that exists in Xamarin.Forms goes away. But the other thing is that in the same way that you bring Essentials into your app and you use as many APIs or as little APIs, you don't worry about the fact that you just brought a substantial library in, then that's, you take what you want, leave what you don't. We expect that to be the same thing with .NET MAUI, and that's definitely a driving architectural design that I hope that the team builds into it. So you can bring in one screen that is shared MAUI code, and the rest of it can be storyboards and XML, Android layouts, and all the things that you have today. Or you can use none of the UI bits, just the essential stuff. But really, everything should be a .NET MAUI app. Everything should just have .NET MAUI. Now, having said that, your Xamarin Android and Xamarin iOS applications will become .NET apps in .NET 6. The SDK style project is one piece of the transition. The recompiling against the .NET 6 bits, the runtime and the BCL, is the other part of it. There are no namespace changes that need to happen. The same ecosystem transition for libraries applies. So if you're using any third-party libraries, they need to be compatible with .NET 6. And need to be recompiled. .NET 5 stuff we are finding, because we just worked through this with the WinUI team. They reported to us this morning that they were able to recompile and run they were able to run WinUI 3 .NET 5 bits on .NET 6. So there is some binary compatibility. Things generally should work if they are good with .NET 5, generally should work with .NET 6 as well. So there is some transition, Nathan, that will happen for Android and iOS applications, irrespective of MAUI, irrespective of Xamarin.Forms, but less transition. But again, vision-wise, I really hope that we can all feel comfortable just saying, yeah, these are all .NET MAUI apps. Kevin asks, yes, Octoprint is exactly what I'm using. Kevin asks, you probably mentioned this, but can you comment if there are breaking changes from 4.8 to 5? There are breaking changes from 4.8 to 5, and there is actually an issue on the Xamarin.Forms repo that enumerates them. They are also enumerated in the release notes, so just check the release notes. Hopefully it's nothing, crazy to you. One of the breaking changes, which technically I think you can still get away with because it was just a deprecation, was master detail page was renamed a flyout page. But there are a few other breaking changes to be aware of. Some of them relating to preview features that were moved out, technically breaking, but because they were preview features, we didn't feel like there was a commitment to them. But anyway, yeah, check the release notes if you would. That stuff should all be there. Let's see. I'll be able to write something like Windows Forms apps that will also be Xamarin apps. So if you're talking about Windows Forms as in WinForms, there really is no Xamarin mobile desktop path for those apps. WinForms is really its own beast in its own silo. pretty much exists for a legacy, although we readily recognize that from a .NET standpoint, it's still super popular. That drag and drop experience still gets a lot of work done for people. But there really is no, unfortunately, integration or cross-pollination with mobile apps in the Xamarin space. Will there be a plan to do Linux GUI programming? So we continue to get asked a lot about Linux, and really the very truthful, very honest, very empathetic answer is there's just no budget for us to do anything for Linux in the UI space for .NET 6. To get the Xamarin workloads into .NET 6 from the runtime, the BCL standpoint, as well as the key infrastructure pain point work that we're doing to the Xamarin.Forms to move it to .NET MAUI, there's just a ton of work there. So Linux continues to be a question we get asked a lot. We do have the GDK stuff that could be upgraded to GDK, I guess 4 is the current version. Is that the way to go? We also have system graphics, which we're starting to take a dependency on in MAUI for just basic graphic types, which also opens the door for us to do broader drawn controls. That could become a way for us to get quicker onto the Linux platform from a UI standpoint, but also kind of introduces a slightly different UI paradigm in that you're basically taking MAUI UI at that point on Linux. So all that to say, we want to do Linux, probably looking at .NET 7 at this point for a realistic timeline on when we could start productizing something, but there's nothing preventing anybody, the door is open for us to introduce Linux in a preview state in the .NET 6 timeframe. But we need either we need availability on our engineering side, we need some partnership from the community. Will GitHub and Azure DevOps be able to build MAUI pipelines when MAUI is released? Absolutely. Yep, for sure. I mean, really, for the most part, it's the same kind of stuff you have with Xamarin today. It's going to be .NET 6 and making sure that the workloads for .NET 6 are part of it. But that does kind of bring up the acquisition and install experience. I think I mentioned that you can install things from the .NET installer from the command line. You can also install the dependencies that you need through the Visual Studio installer as you do today. But the backend infrastructure that makes all that stuff happen and come together is changing. Because we're unifying with .NET, our installers and our packages are moving into what are called, I think we're calling them NuGet workloads. I think they're really hidden, they're behind the scenes, but it uses the same infrastructure that NuGet packages use. Where today you install Xamarin.Forms straight from the NuGet package manager, in .NET MAUI, you'll actually acquire versions of MAUI through the .NET installer. So it'll be slightly different, but it also creates a lot more flexibility. The installers are no longer going to be tied for Android and iOS to Visual Studio releases. So you'll be able to version your Android and iOS from the command line essentially and say, oh, I want to .NET install iOS version, right? And be able to tie yourself to a specific version, which is helpful for doing CI builds when you don't want to have a VS installation update and then, oh crap, my stuff doesn't build anymore because VS changed an underlying dependency. You want to control your own dependencies, not let VS control them for you. So more information will be coming out about that, and because we're actually working through that whole install experience now. So I'm literally talking about something that is moving pieces. I would love to move to MAUI. Yeah, I understand. So your Android XML and for that matter, storyboards and all that stuff, that all should come forward just fine. And then you can use the .NET MAUI embedding, which is basically the Xamarin.Forms embedding, to bring in pieces of shared UI where you want to, when you want to, if you want to. Is the gradient going to support more complex gradients, such as the ones supported by Magic Gradients? I don't know that I could answer that off the top of my head because I don't know all the fancy bits of what Magic Gradients does. So I guess I would say if there are things you can do in Magic Gradients that brushes do not support today, let's open an issue, a spec, open a request on GitHub, and let's make sure that we capture that. But then again, hey, if Magic Gradients is getting the job done, Ben and the team that builds and supports that do a great job with it. We're not here to put third-party libraries out of business. I mean, we love that they're there. Thank you, Andrew. Assuming the community toolkit will continue to grow alongside MAUI into the futures. Yeah, so I mean, the rebooting of the community toolkit was inspired largely because we wanted to continue to have innovation and fill gaps while the .NET MAUI transition was happening, while the core engineering team was no longer pumping out new features, but was focused on the architectural changes. But we are, and so in addition to that, we are also planning for what is the life of the community toolkit post .NET MAUI GA. Let's make sure we make that transition, bring all those things forward. And the great thing is that as we look at bridging the ecosystem through this, all the different libraries, all the different NuGet packages that are out there for Xamarin.Forms and Xamarin, making sure that they can transition to .NET 6 and .NET MAUI, we now have a vibrant and useful UI-based library in the community toolkit to work very closely with and kind of ourselves work through the pain points of that transition so that we can help guide the larger ecosystem in the transition also. So we're looking for more and more opportunities to use our own stuff. And I actually just had a meeting earlier today about Figma and some cool things we can do with Figma to use it. Because I don't know if you know this, but as the UI in VS Mac is being improved and updated and replaced, not all, but a lot of the GDK stuff is getting replaced with native Cocoa stuff on Mac. Those designs are actually being created, designed, and generated from Figma. So we've got a really cool project, Figma Sharp, that the team uses now. It's part of their day in and day out workflow. And it's a really cool way to get the designers tightly involved with the creation of the VS Mac product. And so, yeah, it's pretty cool. I saw some of their new solution panel stuff today, which it's frustrated me the way the solution panel looks and works. So I'm excited to see the UI refresh to that. Other questions, things I can answer for you? Tell me the things you're most excited about. Tell me why you're not excited. Nobody has told me you're leaving to go to Flutter. Are you just being quiet? Not enough time to test it all. Yes, well, you've got until November when we GA. Talk about quality control on the community toolkit. That's great. I know that they have been writing some UI tests. It's not as strictly controlled as the .NET MAUI and the Xamarin.Forms repos have been. In part, that's because we don't want to have too high of a bar for getting innovative work in there. So there is a lower barrier of entry to get things into the community toolkit, and that should be something that everybody is aware of. It's not going to see the same level of UI testing, unit testing, and it doesn't have access to our QA team that does smoke testing, integration testing, and things like that. So the community label definitely there's a lower investment in that. But at the same time, I know that Gerald and company are promoting and putting UI tests and unit tests into the project and making sure that those are running and they're passing and things like that. So that's what I know about it at this point. Really, Gerald and Javier kind of own it. So if you want to contribute to the quality story there, or you just want to go complain to them about it, they would be the ones to express any concerns and or support. Why did they remove the web browser control from WinForms in .NET 5? Any plans to replace it? I don't know why they removed it. I have a suspicion it could be related to the WebView 2 control work that has been ongoing, because I know that everything that we have been working towards for Windows platforms, for WPF for sure, for WinUI, has been WebView 2 related. WebView 2 being the control specifically from the Edge team that has been adopted as the WebView implementation in those toolkits. I would say for that WinForms question specifically, reach out to Olia. Let me see if I have. Do you know Olia? Perhaps be the best one to answer that question. I don't remember Olia's last name. Olia Gavrish. Here's her Twitter. She doesn't directly know. She's in a better position to put you in contact with the right person to answer that. All of the answers that I gave to that question were all suspicions, speculations. Did everybody bring a nice beverage for the evening? Has everybody been enjoying themselves? Anybody have nachos, chips and beans? Can you tell I'm hungry and thirsty?
Getting close to dinner time?
Yeah. I don't know. We're doing yo-yo for dinner tonight. Do you know what yo-yo is?
No.
You're on your own?
Uh-huh. Yep. Yeah, that was my dinner tonight.
I think my grandfather used to call it garbage for dinner. Whatever you can find. Chocolate covered pretzels. Dang. That's delicious. Far past midnight. Ooh, thanks for staying up. I think I'm going to have beer too. Good call.
Cool. So does anyone have any more questions for David? I think we're down to just food suggestions. So I want to thank David for being our special guest tonight. For everyone who came in late, we did record this session. It will be up on our YouTube channel. If you go to our meetup site, the link to it is buried on there somewhere.